All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Today we are calling this session supporting your or using media literacy, supporting your community through media literacy. Along those lines, Stephanie Vagar is our presenter today. She's from the Iowa Department of Education. I can read a little bit about Stephanie. She taught for a year at a bilingual school in Stephanie. Can you pronounce that town for me in Mexico?
Local. It's
Nacolpan. All right.
outside of
Oh, very fun. She received her bachelor's degree from Drake University in secondary education, endorsement in social studies and Latin American studies. Went on to teach at Des Moines Public Schools and Dallas Center Grimes. After that, a master's degree in educational leadership from Drake University. In 2011, she was named an emerging leader by ASCD, which is school counselors. Is that right?
It's like the curriculum directors,
Oh, okay.
kind of the leadership, if you're familiar with that publication.
Wonderful. Currently, Stephanie works as a social studies, world languages, and financial literacy consultant at the Iowa Department of Education. She also serves as the president for the National Council for the Social Studies. And from a state library angle, Nancy tells me, Stephanie, that you are on the Center for the Book Advisory panel.
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful. So thank you for all the ways that you support Iowa libraries. Stephanie has been doing a presentation like this for social studies folks around the state and reached out to the state library and said, hey, would this be a useful thing for Iowa librarians? And we said, oh, you bet. Please come on down. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie. Nancy and I will be keeping an eye on the chat as we go along today. Otherwise, welcome to everyone. And thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. Media literacy is just such a passion area of mine. We've been doing so much work, as Sam said, with Iowa teachers around media literacy and how to support students in doing that. And it just sort of dawned on me that perhaps I could offer this, and certainly would be happy to have further conversations about how we can support this in libraries or with the general public. So we'll be providing kind of a quick overview today and just some of the materials that I've created, but again, happy to have further conversations. And it's really meant to be informal. So please feel free to comment in the chat box, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end as well for questions. So one thing I always like to share at the beginning when we're talking about this and encourage teachers to do this is just sort of set some norms. I think sometimes, especially when you're talking about media literacy, it can really be a sensitive topic in some ways. And so I always just like to share some of these norms, and I'm not going to read all of them to you, but essentially just commit to learning, not debating, listen actively and trying to understand others' views if you were having, especially if you're having this conversation in person. And also recognizing that today I'll be using some examples that are political in nature, but they're just examples of things that are out there that people are sort of passing around as either inaccurate or accurate, and certainly aren't meant to criticize any political party or provide ammunition in some way. Just we're using them as examples in today's presentation. So again, if you were doing this in your own library or talking to folks about it, I would just encourage you to go through some norms at the beginning. I like to start off with this funny that was on the internet a few years ago. And I don't have to read it to you, but just it's referring to April 1st as the only day of the year that people critically evaluate things they find on the internet before accepting them as true. And I'm sure many of you may have also seen the Abraham Lincoln quote that's kind of in a similar vein. Obviously, the internet wasn't around when Abraham Lincoln was president, so he couldn't have said that. But to try to keep things a little lighthearted, that may or may not be true, that April 1st is the only day that people are doing that. And, what we're finding is, and this, I'm preaching to the choir, there's so much misinformation out there. And so we really want to build the skills of our teachers and students, but certainly the general public, in being able to critically evaluate information that they find online. So really quickly, I'll just I'll just say, here is sort of what is media literacy? When we say that, what do we mean? And what we mean by that is the ability to assess, analyze, evaluate, and create media, in some cases in a variety of forms, and the recognition that all media is constructed, and that it is our job, just as sort of citizens of the communities that we live in, to question information that we're processing. And so we'll talk about not only the concern with the misinformation that's out there, but some hopefully helpful tips to share about how to best do that. So I really like this graphic from First Draft, and they have some excellent resources. So and we'll share links to these at the end. But it's a really great resource for learning more about media literacy and lots of the research behind the misinformation that's out there. But they talk about mis, dis, and malinformation, and really that emphasis of how intentions about media really matter. So in terms of the creation of media, what is the person that puts something out there? What's their intention, right? Is the intent to harm? And we'll talk a little bit about purely like fake news, like deliberate creating of things that is meant to be completely inaccurate, all the way to just sort of misinformation in terms of unintentional things. Like even the best of journalists out there, right, sometimes publish things that they didn't know at the time was wrong, or there's some sort of inaccurate information, but the intent was not to create something that was fake. So I think thinking about all information as a continuum, and even sometimes within the same news program, I might see some things that are presenting of some information, but then they might bring a panel of folks to talk about it and the intent of that panel, right, is really to share opinion and is not meant to share news. So really critically thinking about all of the information that we're absorbing and the intentions behind that is really critical in this media literacy world. So one of the helpful tools, at least I think it's fairly helpful, and I know lots of teachers have shared this as well, is thinking about media bias. And really I like to think about this as media perspective, because again, thinking about that intentions piece that we just looked at. So All Sides releases this chart. I think every year they have released this chart. It's updated fairly regularly, where they look at online content only. So I want to be clear that this is not, they don't examine, hours of TV programs, but online content of these sources. And it also does not reflect accuracy or credibility, but sort of perspective. And so this has been a helpful chart in just sort of thinking about the perspective that each of these news organizations bring to the table. Again, not that they're purposefully trying to spread malinformation, but that the perspectives perhaps are different when we're examining online content. And so really shooting for that kind of middle of the chart, and also thinking about, as we maybe come across things that are on this chart, how can we corroborate that information? We use that term in social studies a lot. How can we find other sources that support what we're reading or what we're viewing or accessing with other content? So we're not just looking at one source, but we're checking that with other sources. So this may or may not be helpful if you haven't seen it before, but if you follow All Sides, again, they do update this. I think once a year is how often I've seen it published, maybe 5 or 6 versions of this across time. So as we think about this different perspectives, one of the things that I always like to mention, and this may get a little deep here, but is thinking about the psychology behind media literacy and why a lot of the experts that talk about media literacy say it's so hard to change sort of attitudes or thinking about this. And I think of it kind of like a diet. Like I might know the chocolate cake is bad for me, but I'm still going to eat it, right? And that's one of the things that we see here about the psychology. Even sometimes if we have some of the tools, sometimes we choose not to use them, or we choose to kind of look the other way because of what we call confirmation bias. And that really just means that we sometimes just innately seek out information that confirms our pre-existing views. We like to live in the bubble. We like that, Facebook and some of the other social media tools sort of purposefully sort us into bubbles that continue to confirm what information we'd like to hear. And so that's called confirmation bias. I just think it's an important term to know. And this hot cognition is another term. And again, that's just sort of the emotional response behind the information as we're processing. So positive or negative feelings certainly bias the information that we're trying to process. And then, of course, the opposite of that is disconfirmation bias, the attempt to dismiss perspectives that contradict. Like that can't be true because, I just don't believe that, even if there's clear evidence that does exist. And then some other terms that, again, may be a little bit in the weeds, but just always wanting to share that psychology behind the way that people react to even online being pointed out that, no, that's completely false. And here's the link to where that is false. So just something to think about as you're thinking about working with folks in your libraries about media literacy. So one source that really points this out in an interesting way, at least to me, is the Wall Street Journal a few years ago. And again, you'll have this link, created what they called blue feed, red feed. And really what this was they took news stories that were about similar topics. So in this case, they sorted information about immigration, and they showed these different, going back to the media bias chart, they showed how different organizations really talked about the same issue and sort of spun it for the perspective that they wanted to spin it. So we're not going to spend a lot of time, looking at this, but it's just an interesting resource, especially for students and the general public, to see that, when you see these things side by side, you're certainly getting a different perspective about the same topic and how different news organizations might talk about that, and whether, again, that triggers the confirmation bias or the disconfirmation bias is something to think about. So I want to dive into a study, for example, because, and not to make that sound boring, but there's been some really groundbreaking work out of Stanford in the last, they published this in 2016, have done some amazing work since then about media literacy. And so what they did is and we're going to look at some of these actual examples that they shared. And they gave these examples to PhD historians, professional fact checkers, and Stanford undergraduate students. So you've got three kinds of buckets here. And both the historians and the students often fell victim to really being easily manipulated by the features of these websites. So the websites might have looked great, official looking. They might have had a .org domain name. They might have had all the fancy, graphics and whatnot that you would expect to see. But the fact checkers, on the other hand, over all of these prompts that they shared, really engaged in three main things. And we're going to talk about these throughout the session today. One is sort of charting a plan as this taking bearing, which may seem like a strange term, but it really means like they charted a plan of how they were going to attack the source. The other one that we're going to talk about probably the most and is probably one of my number one sort of suggestions about media literacy, is what they call lateral reading. So going beyond the site, and we'll talk more about this, but prior to this study, a lot of us were really working on, creating like checklists, I would say, for media literacy, like the CRAP test and different things like that. If you're familiar with that, where it's really asking students to examine the site itself for different elements. But what they found in this study was that really wasn't sufficient for really examining whether the site was credible or not. So you need to go outside of the site, and we'll talk about that. And then click restraint in terms of Google. If you're Googling a topic and you're clicking on, the first couple of results, then you're not really practicing click restraint, because we all know how those algorithms tend to sort things. So really being careful about as you're searching for information about something, examining the credibility of the results that might come up in a search itself. So we'll talk more about these, but I first want to look at some of the actual tasks from the study, because I think these just are great examples of practicing media literacy. So the task was, they gave all these three groups the American College of Pediatricians, and here's a screenshot. So again, it looks really fancy. It has the About Us page. It's a .org, right? And so they asked this question: is this a trustworthy source to learn about children's health? And so I would love if we were in person and talking about that, but I'll quickly share some of the results of that. So half of the college students failed to investigate the site. They looked at the site, and when I say investigate, I should be clear, they didn't go beyond the site itself. They did the things like, it's a .org and it looks great, and the About Us page like has all the things that you would think of to make it look like it is kind of the official voice of pediatricians. And here are some quotes, from the students about that, right? And so they didn't go beyond the page to check anything else. They were simply evaluating it based off of the site itself. And Sam Weinberg, who, again, you'll have these slides, I would encourage you to check out this video clip, because he is one of the key authors of this study and really does a great job of explaining, here's how the fact checkers sort of tackle this versus the historians and the students mainly just stayed with the site itself. But the fact checkers immediately stopped and started Googling the American College of Pediatricians and went outside the site to investigate the site itself. So that, when we say lateral reading, that's really what we're talking about, is they leave the site and they go investigate other sources that tell them different information, rather than just looking at that About Us page about the site. And when they did that, they found some interesting information about how this site in particular does not represent the American College of Pediatricians. And I mean, it is the American College of Pediatricians, but it is not the more reputable site. And so it's not the nation's major professional organization of pediatricians. It's actually a conservative advocacy organization established in 2002 after they broke off from the American Academy of Pediatricians. And so the ACP only has about 200 to 500 members, where the American Association of Pediatricians has about 64,000 members. So a big difference there. And no one would have known that if they hadn't have gone outside of the site. So the second example that we will look at here is this video. And this was originally uploaded by an account that was called Eye on Flicks. So, take that for what it is. But the title of the video says, "Democrats Busted on Camera Stuffing Ballot Boxes." And it says, reports to show precincts in Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Arizona And here's the question, posed to the students and the fact checker and the historians. Does the clip provide strong evidence of voter fraud during the 2016 Democratic primary election? So let me try to play just a bit of this. Hopefully it will work. And there isn't sound, you're just seeing.
Okay. The video is coming through for me just fine.
Okay, thank you, Sam.
Yep.
So here's the video. There isn't sound, so if you're not hearing sound, that's okay. So I'll just pause for a second and we'll watch just a minute or so of this. Okay, and it goes on to show a few more locations here that are claiming this is stuffing ballot boxes. So again, a very similar thing happens. You can see, you can watch the whole video for yourself, certainly, but here are some example student responses. The video shows footage of people shoving multiple sheets of paper into a ballot box in isolated places. We can see the expressions of the people shoving paper into the ballot box, and I can tell that they are being secretive and ashamed of their actions. So that is not necessarily inaccurate, right? In terms of what we saw in the video, but whether it is evidence of Democrats in precincts in Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Arizona in the Democratic primary doing that, right, is kind of the other question. So again, the fact checker, just from watching the video, and of course being an adult and voting, in several elections, there are some things that immediately caught my eye, right, of just in general how that might not be accurate. And one is just the fact that most ballot boxes here are some kind of electronic machine or a little more official looking than kind of what you saw on camera there. There were some other geographic things if the video had continued to play, signs that were in another language that immediately would have been sort of red flags for me. And so this video was actually a video posted on the BBC website originally with the headline, "Russian Voting Fraud Caught on Webcam." So it was originally talking about voter fraud and sort of ballot stuffing, but not from the precincts in Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Arizona, like was sort of, cast off. And this video was shared thousands of times, again, as this purported saying this is, voter fraud in the US. So, so just a couple examples that we're hearing about here about how easy it is to just sort of pass along information, and how in this study, except for the professional fact checkers, for the most part, the students and the historians were not able to necessarily discern what they were seeing because they stayed within the source itself rather than going out of the source in that lateral reading example. So let's talk for just a minute about fake news. And again, thinking about that sort of misinformation, malinformation graphic that I showed at the beginning. So I want to go to just a quick video clip about fake news. So we'll try to watch this. It's just a minute and 41 seconds. Again, hoping our sound goes okay.
Fake news, fake news, fake news, fake news. We heard that term so many times during the campaign, it's become a household term.
Fake news is false information that is deliberately presented as if it is real news. It became a very divisive and powerful force in the 2016 presidential campaign.
Hoax sites and hyper-partisan blogs generated more engagement than content from real news sites.
Some of the examples of the fake news stories that really gained traction were the story that the Pope had endorsed Donald Trump. Nearly 1 million people saw on Facebook. Information spread so quickly on social media without any real checks as to whether it's true or not. Fake news has real and very scary consequences.
28-year-old arrested for opening fire inside a Washington, D.C. restaurant.
He was there to investigate a story from the internet that a child abuse ring was being operated there, but the story was completely untrue.
Fake news became such an issue in the 2016 presidential campaign, both with fake stories that were perpetrated all over the internet, as well as with politicians calling out legitimately reported stories about them that they may not like. Fake news.
This article is a prime example of fake news.
I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
The press's job is not to write positive stories about people just because you're the president of the United States. Their role is to challenge the powerful. Calling that fake news really undermines the important role of a free press. The thing that I'd like people to take away from our fake news exhibit is that people have responsibilities in the stories that they read, in the stories that they share, and in your social media conversations.
Okay, so that was just a quick overview of kind of this term fake news from the museum, which is another great resource for media literacy if you're not familiar with them. But what also part of the conversation and within the last few years has actually really tried to move away from this term, mainly because of what we talked about earlier in terms of intentions. Like there certainly are things that are put out there that are completely fake, and we're going to talk about those. But for the most part, when we talk about news, most of it is not outright fake in that regard. And so just the new kind of thinking about this has been to really try to move away from using that term in an outright sense for some of the reasons that you heard about in the video. So let's take a peek at some things and hopefully provide some tips for how we can really determine when we see things online if they're real, if they're not, where did they come from, etc. So this was a really popular Twitter post, and you can see down there that it got over 124,000 likes and was retweeted 77,000 plus times. And it says, believe it or not, this is a shark on the freeway in Houston, and hashtag Hurricane Harvey, although I believe they misspelled Harvey there. So again, if we were in person, we'd have a conversation about, what do you think? Is this really a shark on the freeway in Houston, or is this fake? And I can tell you to break the suspense that this is a completely fake. Not that the image itself necessarily is fake, but it certainly was not a shark on the freeway in Houston. But you can see from, again, the shares and the likes, how many times people shared this without even checking at all, or having any like, I wonder about that. And we'll share a tip at the end about how could I check whether that picture is real or fake if I came across this. So let's look at a few other examples here. A supposed picture of Tom Hanks with this t-shirt. Now, again, probably not harming anything in this example, but things that we're spreading in general that are completely made up are not, in my opinion, something that we want to continue to spread. So this is anytime I see shirts or signs or anything like that, and you can even kind of tell from the image, if you look closely, it doesn't look like it actually is on his t-shirt. It looks like it was sort of photoshopped in some way. And so again, you can see 186,000 shares here, 1.5 thousand comments. So lots of times that this was passed around the internet. And here's the original picture of Tom Hanks. And that is the original shirt he was wearing. So again, not a news story necessarily, but still harmful that we're passing around things that people have completely photoshopped and have made up. Here's another example of a t-shirt. Again, I'm always, that's a red flag whenever you see signs or t-shirts or things, because they're very easy to Photoshop. And And here is actually the original shirt. And so again, just how do we check these things that we see, and that kind of thing. There is also a market of, believe it or not, sites that you can create your own fake news, fake tweets, fake things. So this tweet supposedly by President Trump is actually not a real tweet. He did not say this. There are fake news generators out there, such as the ones that you see over there, Tweet Gen and fake Trump tweet, and then break your own news. You can sort of create your own news story again, and these things are shared over and over again as if they are real, but they aren't real. And so checking, and the media literacy toolkit that we're going to share at the end has lots of different tools to sort of check these things that we're coming across. And obviously you could go to Twitter and check whether these, whether this was really tweeted, but most people don't do that. They just reshare, and you can see how many times this was liked and reshared, even though it was not a real tweet from President Trump. So these things are really alarming. Why I'm passionate about this is because it's certainly alarming to our democracy, and something that we need to really be concerned about as misinformation is out there. Let's do one more example here, and this is actually a fairly new kind of resource. It's called spotthetroll.org. And it was put together by a media literacy organization to it's almost like a game a little bit, where they show you Twitter profiles, and you have to try to figure out, is this real? Is it not real? And they are the real profiles of these folks. So I picked this one out of the Spot the Troll because, as you may have already seen here, this person is from Ankeny. So I was like, oh, that's great, an Iowa example. And so I'm going to give you just a minute to look at the images that I'm going to scroll through some images that are just screenshots from this Twitter profile. And then also look at, you want to look at kind of her about information and the number of followers and people she's following as well. So I'm just going to click through. You've had a chance to look at these two images. Here are some more, both of these about Melania Trump. Okay, and last two screenshots there. All right, so this is one that I shared purposefully because even I got this wrong. I thought Harmony seemed very real, and maybe I was turned off because she's from Iowa, right? She couldn't possibly be not real. And actually, Harmony is a troll. Harmony Anderson is the name of this person, supposedly quote unquote person. She is a troll attributed to the Russian Internet Research Agency in March of 2020. So the people that put this together, they worked with Twitter to have her account suspended. Like many other trolls, Harmony poses as a young woman who has a very strong political opinion and sets herself up in direct opposition to an extreme version of people on the other side of the political divide. The goal is to make us more entrenched and disgusted with one another and make meaningful compromise more difficult. And what's really cool about this Spot the Troll resource is that they then link to, like the full analysis of how they figured out that this person was a troll. But some of the signs, and they weren't all here on Harmony, but some of them is lack of any sort of personal information in kind of the about section that you saw on Twitter there. Also, a lot of these troll accounts like only retweet sort of like political information, rather than any sort of mixture of anything. So that sometimes can be a sign as well. And there's other signs, but just very interesting to think through these. So I would encourage you on your own time to go to that Spot the Troll and kind of go through those yourself and see if you come up with the same conclusions or not.
Stephanie, I thought we might pause for a question that I think got sent to the panelists, which is the question came through as who has time to do these? But and I think you addressed this a little bit, but I think to me the underlying question is like, what is the purpose of doing these? Like, why would somebody want a fake Trump tweet about "Make Canada America Again"? Who benefits? What's the why?
Thank you for stopping me. I mean, I think there's a number of whys. I mean, some people, are trying to be ornery, certainly. Some people, and one, I would back up and say, I often try not to share those with students because we don't want to promote the idea that, hey, you can go out and create these fake things. So, but it's also very purposeful to divide. I mean, there are specific things out there, from other countries about trying to divide us and trying to create division. So certainly, if there's anything that you're seeing, I mean, the three big kind of blamers in this are certainly Russia. Iran is doing a lot more of this. China. North Korea has been blamed for some of these. So certainly trying to divide is kind of that bigger reason. But also it's happening, within the country itself, where people are creating fake things, either because they think it's funny, because they think they can get traction on social media, like, the whole desire to have lots of likes and shares of your thing, even if you're putting something out there that's totally false. And even things as simple, right, as the shark video, which may seem like haha kind of funny, but it's still misinformation that's being put out there, and it's still harmful that it is out there. So I don't know if that's a direct answer to the question, but I think there are a variety of motives, but certainly a lot of the motive is to create division, in some way, or to sort of draw people over to certain sides.
Yeah.
And it's certainly alarming. So thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, another question in the chat, and maybe you're coming to this. Is it illegal?
That's a great question. I'm probably not the best person to answer that question, but certainly anything that would cross, for example, the video we checked out was alluding to like the Pizzagate scandal, that the shooter showed up at this DC pizzeria. So anything where you're doing something that could incite, violence or create, something where somebody thought, that they were going to save the children or save other people or whatever, and violence, or somebody got hurt. Certainly, I think you could be held liable in some way, for creating that disinformation in the first place. So yeah, I mean, I think it could cross that line. I think, just, if I'm putting a fake shark picture out there, that's probably not crossing that. But it certainly is a great question about that. So let me end in talking, just really quickly sharing this artificial intelligence is available now, and we've seen this actually used to mash together video clips of somebody talking and create an entirely different video clip. So this is actually from this was reported on the BBC. So I'll play just a minute of this so you get the idea.
It got me thinking about my full-time employees and their ability to survive on $8 an hour in New York City. And foremost in all of our minds has been the loss and the grief felt by the people of Orlando. Most of us don't get our health care through the marketplace. We get it through our job, or through Medicare or Medicaid. And what you should know is that thanks to the Affordable Care Act, your coverage is better today than it was before. Women can get free checkups, and you can't get charged more just for being a woman. To give his employees come together to pass a common bill that would boost America's very.
Okay, so I'll stop there. But that to me is just totally crazy, right? But I just wanted to make sure that you knew that that is something that is out there. So even, not that we're going to see that, I think, a ton, because it's obviously a lot of work to do that. But that is something that is possible. And we have seen some of that a little bit. It's much more common to fake, just direct images. And one, super important skill that I want to just make sure we have before we leave today. I've already talked about lateral reading, going outside of the document to essentially Google, that organization or that thing that you're, and then trying to discern through those search results about that. Super important. We've talked about that already. But the other one that I think, if you were to leave with two things, I think it would be how to do a reverse image search. And so I want to show that tip to you. So I want to go back to the Hurricane Harvey shark. And so here's actually a news story from USA Today about that. And one thing that you may not know that you can do is that you can, in Chrome anyway, and I think this is true for a few other browsers, you can right click on the image and say search Google for image. So this is a really important tip if you weren't aware of this already, because you can do a reverse image search on Google. And so if I were to do that, I already did that because sometimes my internet is not great. It searched for that. And so immediately, if I had done that reverse image search, when I come across that online, I would see that fact check, right? And I would see also all of the images that had already been shared. And if I, looked into this a little bit, I would see, oh, that's a fake photo. The other thing you can do if you don't want to do it that way is if you go to images.google.com and you have the image. So in this case, I've saved the image on my desktop. I can actually drag the image here and do the same thing. So that is a really important tip because that is the number one way. I mean, because so much of this stuff is through images being faked. That's a really easy way to see where did this first appear on the internet, and to check what images that you're sharing. So that's a quick tip. So lateral reading and the Google reverse image search are really helpful. And just, asking these questions like, who is behind this? So much of what I see shared on social media, whatever the name of the organization is, I want to know who's behind that thing. What is the evidence for the claims that they're making? And what do other sources say? What the corroboration thing, right, about this source? And certainly, again, going beyond sort of just looking at the source or the image itself, because as we saw, we're not going to be able to figure that out if we don't sort of go outside of the document. So I know I'm I think running a little bit short on time, so I'm going to skip to the media literacy toolkit, and I certainly want to also have some time for any questions, because I know there's some in the chat box. So I put this together, again, trying to have a little more of an audience of the public, an audience of librarians, based off of some things that we have shared with teachers. So this is really meant to be more of like a mini training almost of media literacy, like a little mini book if I were reading this. So some of this we've already talked through, and I'm just going to kind of skim through. But if you were wanting to dive in, there's a couple pages here on, when we say media literacy, what are we talking about? And you can click in the videos embedded within this. You're going to see some things that we just went through, like that picture from First Draft News. And then in some places there's kind of, stop and think about this. So kind of a workbook feel as well. why media literacy matters. So you're going to get a little data there on, this is why this is concerning to the democracy, because if there's so much misinformation out there, people can't discern right from facts. So this is why this matters. And then here are a more expanded version of what we just talked about, right? In terms of skills to be news literate, the difference between news and opinion, kind of walking through that, going outside of the post, etc. So it's got kind of a workbook, mini book feel to it. And so I would love to hear feedback about this, if this is helpful, if it's not helpful, because again, we kind of adapted it for trying to think of a more adult audience to this, rather than the student or teacher audience that we're normally working with. You can also see some of these tools, and some of them we did not talk about in the presentation. So there are good resources out there. Also, one is called Bot Sentinel and Botometer, where you can actually check a Twitter user account, like to see, does it seem like this Twitter user might be a bot of some kind or might be a troll? And they do this like evaluation of, content they've posted and, when they join Twitter and that kind of thing, which are some signs as well. So these are linked in here. And I want to go kind of scroll to the bottom. Hopefully I'm not making you dizzy with my scrolling, but we did share. It's freezing on me, but at the very bottom or the very end, there are also kind of a list of resources. So I would encourage you to check out some of these resources. Like you can look at who owns the website that you're looking at. Go to some of these already, the sites already that do a lot of fact checking, so that you're not out there trying to do this yourself. Certainly a section about fake news, and then some research, some of which I shared earlier, and then this additional resources and tools that you see here. So there's lots of resources out there that I hope people can kind of add to their toolbox of this, but I do want to pause to allow time for questions, because I rolled through that pretty quickly.
Yeah, this is so great, Stephanie. I know you sent me a copy of this thing and I was practically drooling. So I'm so excited that we can have this on the State Library website as a resource for folks. We have had a few folks asking, what can they take and give directly to their communities from the examples that you've given? I mean, is this fair game? Get it out there, start educating people, or are there things, or is there any caveats that you would provide as far as what people post and how?
No, I mean, any of this is completely, meant to support you in doing this kind of thing in your own community, in your own library. So absolutely, sort of have at it with, taking all or part of this, whether it be the slides or the media literacy toolkit as well.
Mm-hmm.
Not copyrighted in that sense at all from my end.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'll just chime in and remind people of the caveats that Stephanie started her presentation with, which is like some of these examples are inherently political, and we're not trying to call out one side or another when we post this kind of thing. And so if you if you just put it out there with no context, it might be a little alarming or confusing to someone. And so I know someone in the chat mentioned they had a community conversation on this topic. And I think that kind of environment would be a great place to use something like this, where you have time to set some context and talk with people and explain, no, I'm not picking on Trump, or I'm not picking on Biden, or I'm not picking on whoever, but to say, all right, here are some ways that we as a community can be better about and smarter about this.
Well, and I'm going to jump in here too and just remind everybody that in libraries, we try to present all sides of an issue, not definitely not show political bias one way or the other. So be really careful in how you do talk about those things and put those caveats in there, so that nobody thinks that the library itself is trying to spout a political point of view.
Yeah, and I think that's super important and hopefully you found some balance in even what I shared that this is not, there's not one side that's doing this and the other is not. I mean, this is being, there's misinformation about every side out there. And it's dangerous no matter who is, where it's coming from. I think any misinformation is certainly, alarming. So
I know it makes me feel like I'm being played, and
yeah.
and some stuff I will fall victim to easier than others,
Yeah.
because some of it is well done, and so it's harder to pick it apart a little bit. But somebody made a comment about wouldn't this great creativity could be used for good and not for evil, so to speak. But
exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's a great question earlier about, why would people spend their time doing this, right? Because I certainly don't have time to do it.
I know.
But yeah, people do. People either think it's funny or, they're trying to sow division, and it's just something to be, concerned about. But again, equipping folks with those tools of how to check some of these things and at least be aware, right, that this is happening, I think is really important. So
we did have one question, and I know none of us on this call, or at least none of the panelists, are computer scientists, but we had one question that was, if you share a fake news post or something generated by one of these trolls, do they then have your information? And I don't know that this is necessarily about like, oh, well, now we trapped Carol. She shared our post. But at the same time, so many of these social platforms are engineered to show you more of what you've seen before, it seems to me. So it does seem like a sort of dangerous cycle of, if you get kind of in this rabbit hole, you're going to be seeing more and more. Is that your impression, Stephanie, or would you offer any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer in terms of your personal information. I don't know the answer to that, although I think, whatever you put in your social media profile certainly would be viewable. But I think it's absolutely correct. And there's a new popular kind of documentary about this called The Social Dilemma on Netflix about the algorithms that are sort of used, and you may have heard discussion about this after the 2016 election, really using those algorithms to, sort of target undecided voters, based off of the amount of, I guess there's a lot of research out there about how Republicans, Democrats, independent voters, what their patterns are, what their habits are. And so there was a lot of discussion about being able to target voters, based off of what those kind of social media patterns were showing. And that was certainly used, at least in the 2016 election, to try to influence people with those kinds of fake posts or malicious posts, to get people to think one way or the other. And that isn't even in the the US Senate report about the Russian kind of hacking of the election. So that's a really interesting read if you're ever interested in looking that up, because they have all the examples, many of the examples that were used in the election interference to try to sway people's thinking about the candidates. So I don't know if that's a complete answer to your question, but certainly it would be something that I would be concerned about.
Yeah, and Eunice, our colleague in the Northeast District, has added a comment that you run a risk of adding credence when you share it. And I think, if you're known as a librarian, as an information professional in your community, just a red flag that we can be extra cautious, to be thought leaders in this, in our professional and in our personal lives, because people know, people expect that we have some, maybe skills or savvy that they don't always apply. And so for me personally, I'm always very cautious of sharing anything news related especially on my feeds that involve a lot of my family or personal connections, until I've verified. And so it's a game, but it's a professional responsibility, I think.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephanie, so much for your time today. I'm going to stop our recording and give some details about our continuing ed.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.